Oh, hello, everybody. It is Thursday, July 10th, and I wanted to drop a quick line to reflect on this week because, on the one hand, I am so done. I am so done talking about Epstein. I am done with it. And I know people will say, oh, you're a sellout. Oh, you're trying to cover it up. No, that's not it at all. But I care about things that are about productivity and the future and fixing things that really need to be fixed. And I want to walk you through the points that I made in a Substack of mine, which you could find at aaron.substack.com. It got a lot of attention. My Substack's not that big, not yet, and but it had a lot of impressions compared to the size of my Substack and the number of subscribers that I have, because I actually just am done talking about Epstein. And people might clip this if anyone sees this and will try to say that I'm saying I don't care about the victims, I don't care about justice. That isn't true. I would argue that I actually care more about the victims and more about justice than the people who are just harping on this list and on this case. Because I care about victims that I donated to the Tim Tebow Foundation that helps victims of child trafficking. I actually care about the country moving forward and being healthy and stable. The people who are feeding you slop and trying to take your brain and have it fixate on this topic, I don't think they actually have your best interests at heart. And so we're going to get into that. But yes, no, I'm actually done because justice will not be served with Epstein in the end. Even if we had all kinds of information, I'm going to walk you through why that is that we would not actually see justice. One of those points, though, is it would be the Diddy trial times a million. And what do I mean by that? I mean, it is incredibly difficult to prosecute these cases. It's a spectacle. It takes up people's bandwidth, attention, money, everything. And for what? For people to just not actually be convicted of the crimes they committed. We're going to get into this more and more, but the title of what I wrote is the last article you'll need to read on the Epstein list. And that's how I feel, because hopefully after this video, I will not have to talk about it again, because as long as we're not getting anything out of the White House or the Trump admin in general, you're still going to see lots of people who cannot stop talking about this. Because if you remember, I wrote an article, which I read on my channel a couple weeks ago, and it was about the retard right, and that their strategy is about keeping you afraid, right? And keeping you angry. And that is how they make their money. So right now, do they want you caring about the Epstein list because they actually care about these victims? The same people who've been championing Andrew Tate and his ilk, those people are trying to convince you that they care about justice and victims and child trafficking and just sex trafficking in general, that they care about that. Or do they care about clicks and making money and keeping you angry? Okay, so think about that. So I want to go through a few things. The first is that I think it's fair to ask why Pam Bondi said she had a list on her desk, why Cash, Dan Bongino, why Trump. They all promised the release of this information. There are a few answers here. One is that some people like to show off, right? And show information that they supposedly have. I know this very well because I'm in the influencer sphere and I see the way people talk online and I know what their lives are actually like. So do I think there's a very great chance that they knew there was information, they didn't have as much, and then once they really got into the thick of it, they realized they didn't have enough to prosecute, or maybe they didn't, we forget this was actually a different time. Records were not kept in the same way. People had fewer photos from their weddings than a girl has today when she goes to take a selfie in the bathroom, right? Man went to the moon and took fewer selfies. So just the documentation aspect of this, I do think is just, we're applying a 2025 framework to an early aughts and 90s era, right? So I think that could be part of it. I'm going to get into other aspects of what I think they may have come across as well. But, we did get information over about a decade ago. Gawker published Epstein's address book, that little black book. If you remember it, I remember it being very controversial because there were some Israeli names in there, like Ehud Barak, and people used that to point to the fact that this was Mossad or Israel, which is so funny because if this were Mossad, they would not be releasing a former president of Israel's name in the address book. The only names that were actually left off of that release were the victims' names. Rightly so. You don't want their names out there. So we've had evidence for a long time. And what we know from that little black book is that it was a range of names and they had a range of types of connections with Epstein. Some of them were like colleges. He had a college at Oxford listed in there on the contact information. He had friends. We know Donald Trump was on the flight logs for the plane, and we know he was as far as he could be from Epstein without, when you're wealthy and successful, you end up in circles with people. We know Donald Trump made comments saying, oh, he likes them young, so he clearly was disgusted and repelled by Epstein, but he was still in that list, right? We know there are people that were in this address book that Epstein was pursuing. He wanted to connect with them. So I think I do not agree with people, and you could call it elitist, you could call it whatever you'd like. I do not agree with the notion that for some reason the entire population, the mob rule, just gets to get all information. Now, I don't think it should have been promised in the first place, but I don't understand this entitlement that for some reason everyone deserves to know everything. That's not true. That's why we have guardians of information. And I know people will say they'll call it all kinds of things. Guess what? The founding fathers would agree with me, not with you. If you think all information is supposed to be with everybody, that's actually deeply irresponsible, because imagine a world where the list with the address book, which has been released already 10 years ago, that list comes out and people then speculate, well, who was actually part of the trafficking, who was participating, who was sleeping with barely legal or not even legal girls, right? It becomes a very dangerous, tricky world. And is that worth it? I think I personally think that they realized there was so much information and very difficult to prove that it's not that there's no proof of anything. It's just, it's a mess. And what you would get instead is probably vigilante justice. What you would get is people on both sides of the aisle with enemies, people that they want to take down, people that they hate, on a list or associated in some way. And it gives everybody an excuse. And it becomes the Salem witch trials, where you could just point to someone and there's actually no way for them to defend themselves, because how do you prove you didn't do it? So I think that's probably a really big part of that, okay? So what I write about here is, let's assume the worst case scenario, right? That they gained access to something so disturbing and explicit. We know that they have videos. They say it's just of Epstein with the girls. I think it's likely there are other people in these videos, but you don't know. But I think that Pam Bondi and Donald Trump, the man that so many have trusted no matter what, but because he's breaking the confirmation of their conspiracy and the conspiracy they've been peddling to their followers for years, this extreme focus on the past, on something that just, it's so bloodthirsty. It feels like the mob at the guillotine, right? They just want a head. They want a head to play with. And also they think that in exposing this, that somehow it will only be the Bill Clintons of the world. It's not going to be their own heroes. And by the way, I'm not saying because someone's on your side, you don't expose them, you don't prosecute them. I think people are deeply underestimating the absolute catastrophic mess that would happen if all this information really came to light. It would be, because it wouldn't just be on the left and the right of the United States. We know that the people who participated in this were the top echelon members of society from the world. So we're talking about everybody and anybody having some link to this. And so at what end? At what cost to prosecute this versus, I don't know, fixing Medicaid fraud and making sure health insurance is more affordable for Americans and closing the border and deporting these illegals. And people will say, well, that's a distraction. from the issue. You're trying to distract from Epstein. No. When you're peddling this Epstein issue, I'm not going to call it conspiracy because it's when you're harping on this subject, you are distracting people from the fact that you're not doing anything, that you're not being productive. Okay? And I think there's a good chance that if they did find information, we're assuming worst case scenario, that the Trump administration is lying to us about what they found. And by the way, there's a good chance a lot was destroyed through the years, right? But either way, let's just say this information is just being hidden by them. That means they think we cannot handle the truth. And I think they're right. If they have the information, I actually think it is their obligation, it is their responsibility to maintain stability for America, which means stability for the world. And in this case, it would likely mean, and I think 99% means, you don't release this information because that's not justice. That's heads on a spike. That's what leads to vigilante justice. It would actually cause chaos. And we are in the business. The Trump administration, I say we, I'm not part of the Trump administration, but those of us who care about the country seriously are in the business of maintaining stability, okay? And justice for as many people as possible. And what does that mean in this case? Justice does not necessarily mean releasing a hodgepodge of information. Also, if you'll remember, there were some people in Congress, there were some influencers who were promising us that we would get the JFK files, the MLK files. What did they do? They had a movie producer come in, some expert, like this person who's been largely discredited from actual experts, from people who actually read books. That expert, this movie director, was discredited. That was the person that Congress chose to bring in for this committee that we've never heard from ever again because they're not serious people. They don't actually know how to run an investigation. We've gotten no new information about JFK or MLK. And the people who are running that committee are the same people clamoring about Epstein, insisting somehow that they are certain that there's information we don't have that's being hidden from us while never proving that's the case. They actually were running a committee to get this information and they weren't able to. And instead of saying, maybe the information doesn't exist, maybe it was destroyed, the answer is that we're in a giant web of a conspiracy theory because then you just keep believing them and they were never wrong. And you stay addicted to the rage bait agitprop. And that's how they keep you interested and engaged and making them money. Okay? But I will always talk to you like you're an adult because you are. And I respect you. And I'm not going to always tell you what you want to hear. By the way, if new information about Epstein came out today, I would take that information into account because I don't just look for confirmation bias. That is not what I am here for. Okay? But let's just talk through for a minute about Epstein and what it would mean with this information, right? I mean, I'm going to go through here and talk about, I already said a lot of this, which is good. I mean, in this article, I say, the problem is that also what these people are saying is the list. The term the list originates from a random article. No one ever said, to ask yourself, when did you ever hear someone talking about the list, right? As if Jeffrey Epstein just kept a list of pedos that just said pedos, right? And that's just what he had. And that's what people were expecting. It's so simple. It should show you how low IQ this argument is, that they're angry about the list. By the way, I have friends who were at that influencer day. I was actually invited to that day and I did not go for various reasons. But I know people who were at that day with Bindergate, right? And if you'll notice something, actually look at the fact that most influencers did not hold the binders up because you know what that day was supposed to be? The White House, Pam Bondi, they were actually, and I'm not trying to be a Pam Bondi apologist in any way. I don't know exactly what was going through her mind, but she gave these binders out to the influencers and they were under embargo and they were told, this information is going to be released to the public, but we're giving you a binder right now so you could take a look. So when it's released in a few hours, you'll kind of be ahead of the curve and you'll be able to comment on it, okay? Friends of mine, including an influencer who spoke on the Ben Shapiro show the next day, detailing exactly this sequence of events, told me they couldn't have been more clear. This wasn't supposed to be a giant show. It wasn't a setup. These influencers want you to think they were set up to be embarrassed. They were told, this is under embargo. Do not show this to anybody until everything's released in the afternoon. And a bunch of them who wanted to show they had an inside scoop, who chased clout, wanted to show off, went and stood in front of photographers holding up the binders. I could tell you, as someone who's walked out of that exact entrance and exit to the West Wing, there are always photographers lined up, and generally smart people, like most of the influencers who were there that day, they will just walk away. They'll just walk down the path back towards the Eisenhower Executive Office building. They'll walk back towards this classic exit where you'll leave the White House grounds, okay? Those influencers chose to show off, and now they're pretending they were set up by the White House. Whereas friends of mine, I have multiple friends who were there who did not pose for the photos. They won't tell you they were set up. They'll tell you, yeah, I'm glad I didn't pose with a binder like an idiot, right? That was a clown show. It also made our movement look just so bad, okay? But it was not some set, not everything's conspiracy. And because those influencers won't take accountability for the fact that they broke embargo, they want you to think it's all wrapped up in the same giant conspiracy. But it's not, okay? So there you go. There's some of the truth about what happened on that day. I'm not dropping any new information, just not really spoken about, but this was on, Emily Austin spoke to this matter. She's one of the people I know who did not pose for the photos. There were many others who didn't pose. If you noticed, we know other people were there that day. They were smart. They didn't post at all. Isabel Brown didn't post. ALX, Colin Rugg. You had people with the intuition and grace to respect the embargo and to understand also that they should maybe look and see what's in this before they pose with it, before they smile with what they think is information about child sex trafficking, okay? So this is not new information, but it is interesting how it's not out there. If I have to guess, I think the White House doesn't want to punch down on this. And so they're not, and also they know that a lot of these influencers have been long time supporters. And so they're not throwing them under the bus, but these influencers are throwing the White House under the bus when they actually were the ones that misbehaved. I actually can't believe if you break embargo, especially with the White House, to me, that's a pretty unforgivable offense, okay? But let's go back to Epstein himself, okay? I think there's a chance that the White House realizes that there's no way that people would absorb this information rationally when we live in a world of Hassan Piker and Dean Withers and Nick Fuentes and the Hodge twins and Jake Shields and Destiny and Candace Owens and Cenk Uygur. I don't know how to say his last name. That guy, so annoying, always on Piers Morgan. They know that. They know that it would just sow so much chaos that how is that justice? How is that good? And these influencers, again, all these people that I mentioned and others, including a lot of people on the right, they want you to think that they are pursuing the truth for justice because you deserve the truth. No, they want clicks. They want virality. Guess what the White House doesn't care about? They're not on, JD Vance is on Twitter. Trump is not on Twitter. Trump is watching the 7 p.m., 8 p.m. news on Fox. Okay? That's what he's watching. So he's not listening to all your noise clamoring about this. He does not exist to give you your headlines, even though so much of the right acts as if he does. When they've all made their money off of him for basically a decade, that's how they treat Trump. He's supposed to feed their headlines. And now that he's on the way out, this is his final term, you're seeing a lot of them feeling comfortable turning on him because they need to keep making their money and keeping you engaged. Okay? And so I know I seem agitated, and I wrote about this in the article. If I seem impatient, it's because I'm sick of talking about this. I said this at the beginning. I'm sick of talking about this. And no, I feel for the victims, but that's not what any of the circus is about, okay? Because also none of the people who are engaging in all this rage bait agitprop, none of them care about the victims. Go to any of their profiles. See how many names of victims you can find on their page, okay? See if they've helped any charities, the anti-human trafficking charities, because I donated to the Tim Tebow Foundation. That to me is a better use of time and money, okay? So, and these are the same people, of course, who defend Andrew Tate. They not only defend Andrew Tate, they treat him like an amazing celebrity to be sought after. They welcome him with open arms. They tell them they're huge fans. They bloviate to him on their shows. So these people really want you to think that they care about human trafficking? Please, I'm over that. I'm so over that, okay? So let's see. What else do I want to talk to you about? I said a lot of this. Yeah. No, this is my point, right? I think a lot of them are mad that Pam Bondi is not giving them a lot of them look stupid posing with these binders. And they would like they want something to justify why they made themselves look like fools. And so now they're spinning out. And a lot of people think they want to know the truth. And they don't. Like, people say they want to know how the sausage gets made, and then they're too sick to eat. I think that's the case here. I think that's potentially what the White House found and what the DOJ found. I also think a lot could be destroyed, or a lot might not. Imagine, how would people act if Pam Bondi showed up and said, we have all of this. We have these names, we have these videos, but it's impossible to prosecute because of laws, because we're actually still a country with laws. So we can't do anything. How would that go over? How would people, you think people would react well? These people who are acting like crybabies, okay? It's like, there's so many other things. I mean, I feel what Trump said, that's how I feel. Are we still talking about this? Trump just brokered the end of a war in the Middle East. And it's like, you want to talk about Epstein this many years later? But it's because a lot of these people only have one mode, which is taking a boogeyman topic that will always keep giving and keep rage baiting and keep getting the money and sowing division and paranoia, because that's how they stay relevant to you, because they have actually nothing new to offer you. Okay. So I just ask yourself, when you're listening to different people, you shouldn't blindly listen to me. You shouldn't blindly listen to anybody except for God. Okay. So ask yourself, are these people walking you through the points to help you know how to think about the subject, whatever it is, Epstein or otherwise? Are they helping you think about it, or are they telling you what to think without that? And that tells you if they have your interest in mind or not. That tells you if they actually want you understanding the world or blindly following their viewpoint. Okay, so with that, I think that's enough for this week. I pray that I never have to talk about this again. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I hope you had a great 4th of July last weekend. And I will see you next week.